Welcome, everybody, aboard the Tabletop Express. My name is Chris Barrows, and this is Creators Corner. I'm excited today. It's the first time I've got to do Creators Corner in a while. And usually at this point on the show, when we get a chance to do Creators Corner, it's because we've found someone we think is really interesting. They've got a really unique project, and that is certainly the case here today. Excited to have two guests. We've got not just the designer, but also the developer. And in this case, we've got William Thompson as well as David Thomas. So I'm going to bring them in. They are the designer and developer of Winter Rabbit. Going to bring them aboard right now. Hi,
Hello.
everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
So if you both actually have a chance, since we've got two of you, just introduce yourselves and let everybody know kind of what your work on the game was.
Yeah, Will Thompson. I designed Winter Rabbit. I am the co-owner of Absurdist Productions with Dave. We've been working together on a few games over the last several years, and this one is one that I'm really proud of and really excited about.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I was the developer on Winter Rabbit. Will said co-owner of Absurdist Productions. We've been working on stuff together since 2017, I think now. This will be our third published card/board game when it comes out.
Yeah, and it was one that grabbed my attention just visually. I'll just set it up front. So as we get into this, and we'll share some visuals, I know, as we talk here today, it grabbed me so much visually when I saw it. But I want to start with what I always start with Creators Corner with, and I want to ask a question of both of you. I have always wondered, of everyone who's come on this show, and with everyone I meet in board gaming, what was it that was your origin story? What was it that got you into gaming in the first place? And certainly we can start with you, Will, and then go to David. But tell me, what is that origin story for you?
I guess if we want to go back all the way to the beginning, I played a lot of card games with my parents. So my mom would teach me spades and hearts and things like that. And with my dad, I kind of learned how to play chess and Stratego and Risk and those sorts of games. And my parents had a lot of game nights when I was a kid, playing the games that were popular in the 80s, right? Like they would play Yahtzee and they would play Pictionary and stuff like that. So I was always interested in it. And I really got back in, as I became a teenager, I started playing things like Dungeons and Dragons. Eventually that led to stuff like Warhammer, and then eventually into hobby games. But we got into actually design and development stuff. So originally, I started off doing some kind of RPG stuff, just some homebrew kind of things. And then eventually I moved into a job that was designing educational video games, right? So I started making actual games to teach a lot of different subjects, mostly to high school kids and stuff. And then I met Dave, and we ended up, and I'll let him tell that part of the story, but we ended up kind of forming this company together based on one of his ideas. That's kind of it. I've always been into gaming, and just having the opportunity to actually get into the hobby space and do some of this stuff has been really awesome. So I'll let Dave take the second part of that answer.
Yeah. So, kind of similar, when I was a kid, a lot of, we had a Thursday night game night with the family, playing a lot of, Phase 10 and Uno and Spades and Hearts and whatnot, different board games. Probably the first kind of pseudo design stuff I did when I was around 10 or 11 years old. I inherited a copy of Heroes Quest that was missing the rule book and the adventure book, and I kind of reverse engineered it. Got into RPGs and all that kind of stuff. And then eventually, we went to PAX South back in, was it 2015? I think it was the first PAX.
One of those, 14 or 15,
yeah.
I don't remember. Yeah.
The first PAX South. And sat in on a couple of different presentations, panels, talking about game design, that sort of thing. And then a friend of ours talked us into going to a Brazilian steakhouse. And as a result of those various events, I came up with this crazy idea for a card game based on fighting over food at a Brazilian steakhouse. That same trip is essentially where I met Will. And so I was talking to him about this game, and I was also at the time looking to get, like, I was leaving the military where I was an instructor. And so we started talking about it. He's like, I design educational games. You should apply to, the college here and work with me on that. And so I did that, and that led to us also joining together to publish my game, Choice Korea. And then we went from there.
That's awesome how it kind of just worked out. It came together, fate played its part, right? And those are always fun stories, especially when you talk about, publishing games, right? And we'll get into the game in a moment that you're going to be putting out shortly, but talk about that from the side of just coming together to actually, get these games to the market, and how you consider what is the game that is ready for that, right? And whether that's crowdfunding or you just flat out making and putting it out, that's still a decision that this game is fully baked and it's ready to go. And that's a big decision.
Yeah. So as a company, we kind of just sort of have taken the philosophy of making the kind of games that we want to see in the world,
Mm-hmm.
kind of making the games that we like, games that are a little bit different, that have like a cool, unique spin onto them, some kind of different, just, a lot of companies, it's like very cohesive, kind of like theme to what they're doing, and we're just kind of like all over the place, but it's all very unique stuff. And if you kind of see it, there's a thread there, but it's a little bit hidden.
Yeah. It's all very us, but
it's all very us, right? And coming at these games, I think Dave had a really awesome idea with Korea, right? And I could see that, and it was enough that made me go, hey, we should do this because I think this has potential. And it did. After that, we bounce a lot of ideas off of each other. I think having somebody there to help me and to bounce ideas off with and to keep me on task sometimes is really, really helpful. This is not a job that I think that either of us could do by ourselves. We both have full-time jobs. We're just trying to make this thing work. Yeah. And I think it's been super, super helpful having a partner on that to manage it, because we're dividing up things, because, bringing something to market on Kickstarter is a lot of work.
It is,
and each project has been a little bit more work than the previous one. So dividing up that stuff, having maybe Dave will go talk to the fulfillment agencies and the manufacturers and handle that end while I'm putting together the graphic design on the Kickstarter page. And, and then we're passing things back and forth, because we're both going to have a bajillion typos and spelling mistakes and everything we write. So
yes,
I don't know if I'm answering your question or not. Dave, take over.
But yeah, it's figuring out when the game's ready. I think is one of the hardest things for any designer, is, because there's an old adage, is a game is never finished. You just stop working on it. You kind of pick a point and go, okay, this is the game. And then, maybe eventually you end up with a second or third or fourth edition where you went back and continued to fix those things that bugged you, but you didn't have time to get to them before. But yeah, we're very data driven. So we do a lot of play testing, a lot of recording data, and, checking things for balance and fun and all that sort of thing. And when we get to a point where we don't feel like there has to be changes, that's usually when we kind of stop. It's like, okay, there might be things we could change this, we could add this, but if we don't have to make any more changes, that's usually for me, okay, this is where I'm going to stop, and now I can polish. Now I can,
Yeah.
And I have to imagine Kickstarter probably provides some. Again, I know you go in ready to produce, right? But you do get some live feedback when you've got a Kickstarter happening, and probably get some thoughts and ideas, that some that can be implemented and some that are just not something you can do immediately, but probably spark some ideas for the future if you were to do a second edition or an expansion. I can only imagine that feedback is there in those comments. That's for sure. I've seen those comments, Fred.
Yeah. It is. And, and we also try to get a lot of feedback before then, right? Having, meetups that we can go to with other designers, or just going to game nights and either making our friends play it or making the random strangers at an event play it, right? It's all super important to get that feedback. And not all feedback is actionable. Some of it's not. Some of it you have to parse out why they're making the feedback, right? Why they're making that comment. They'll give you the weirdest suggestion, and then you have to stop and go, well, what where did the suggestion come from? And once you figure that out, once you know where it came from, you might make a completely different change from what the playtester suggested, which is totally fine. But that comment, if you can do that, can sometimes help you get into that. But yeah, it's really hard to know when a game is ready, right? Like Winter Rabbit took a lot. I went through like a lot of iterations, because I always knew like what I wanted the game to be. Like I knew at the core, I wanted this semi-cooperative game. I wanted it to like have these particular principles and this particular type of story that it was trying to tell. But getting to that point took a lot of iterations, and I learned a lot in the process. And a lot of it was just like trying something and then stripping everything away until I got back to the core of what it really was. And once Kickstarter's going, there's definitely things that we can and will change, especially in like the rule books and clarity and explaining things better. Like a lot of that comes at the very end. You try to have it not at the very end, but there's always a lot left at the very end. And we get a lot of that feedback. There's certain things, of course, that once you launched on Kickstarter, it's like locked, right? Like the art's not changing, the basic format of the game's not changing, but there's plenty of things that still can, right? And that feedback is still very important. And we definitely want to listen to people based on what they want, because you can get so wrapped into a game, so wrapped into the design of it, that you don't see outside of your own perspective. And it's really important to always kind of keep that communication open and be willing to hear those things.
I mean, it's the other bonus of having a partner is the same thing. Is there's been times where, Will's been stuck on something. We start talking about a thing, and why don't we just change this little thing? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, why, why didn't he think of that? And it's just because, you get so deep in your own game. But sorry, I interrupted you there. No,
but it's true. What you're saying is exactly right. I mean, I can even say it just doing this channel, because I had done Tabletop Express for a long time. I won't say a long time. I did it for a year or so, and I wasn't doing with anyone else. And then even bringing in one other person to be a co-conductor on the channel completely changed the direction we were able to go and how much we were able to do. And doing a live call-in show, which, you don't see all the time in the space. But that idea was not mine. And so I can say that the freshness that you can get from someone to bounce off ideas off is huge. I think too that what you have put to the table for some people with this playtesting so far, I can say it looks really great. Just to give people a visual. I mean, this is one of the visuals you had shared with me prior, just kind of show it off, and immediately, again, illustrations grab my attention. The art is just fantastic, and it all looks pretty I mean, it looks pretty compact, and even though there's a lot of stuff there, it doesn't overtake or overpower the table from my view, even from the perspective of, and I'll drop a link for this in the description, but there was a Twitch live stream you did, and I thought, again, it was another great overview. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you about this game, Winter Rabbit, which the first thing that grabbed my attention about this one was one, thematically, you were going from obviously a different perspective. Even the characters that you're playing as, I should say in this for people to have an idea, you're looking at, these are your character cards. You've got the otter, the deer, the bear, the opossum, the wolf, and the terrapin. Did I say it right? Terrapin? Okay. But this is based on Cherokee folk stories, this folklore. Talk to me a little bit, because I know there's a personal connection here, obviously, but talk to me about the thoughts about creating a game around this folklore. Where did that origin come from? Where did that start?
So so I'm Cherokee. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. I grew up on the Cherokee Reservation in eastern Oklahoma. So this has always been like a part of my life. But I have to say that, like, when I got into game design, that wasn't something that I was thinking about connecting to it, right? Like, it just hadn't occurred to me that was a connection I could make. And I started seeing a few people who were doing really cool things with modern indigenous media and in games. And it started getting me thinking about how I could make that connection. And so I started looking at games from that perspective, and I started seeing that, okay, there's just a ton of games that follow sort of like imperialistic, kind of like colonial ideas, right? And that's just extremely common in games. And there's even a lot of games that I really, really like. I really enjoy playing those games that are that. But you start thinking about it from that perspective, and I start thinking, well, how could I do this differently? How could I do this from a perspective that brings in my cultural values and some of the history and the ideas behind that, to do a game that just tells a different story, right? And so I settled into these animal stories that have these different animal characters because of all of the sort of oral tradition and ideas there are. Those are very like playful, malleable stories. There's nothing really hindering, from within the culture, nothing really hindering me from just kind of messing with those stories and playing with them and doing something cool like this. So I started with that, and I started thinking of like the kind of principles I want, right? Like I wanted something that wasn't about continuous consumption and extraction of resources. So I built in things where there are, you're balancing, like how much the land can produce and conservation. You're balancing how much resources you can actually hold. You've got a limited inventory, so overproducing doesn't really help you. I started bringing in ideas about storytelling and how like oral tradition and narrative like helps everybody. So the stories in the game are these benefits for everyone, while other cards that you build are really just a benefit for you and your personal engine. Because ultimately it's it is sort of like a Euro game, right? It's a game where we're producing resources and we're building out an engine and we're collecting points based on the things we're able to do with those resources and trying to optimize that. But it is also a semi-cooperative game, because there is a collective win condition, right? The win condition is that we are preparing this village for winter. And to do that, we need to complete so many of these tasks, these task cards. And the task cards fill up 3 different trackers that represent like our food and clothing and tools that we need for winter. If all of that's full, then whoever has the most points wins. So, you get points for doing different things that help the village, building different cards and completing tasks and things. So if we finish that, then whoever has the most points wins. And it's kind of like bragging rights, right? You provided the most, you gave the most, you did the most. If we don't hit that collective like goal, that cooperative threshold, then there is no winner. It's over. Like the village wasn't ready for winter. We're done. It's over. So I like that idea that it was competitive, but not like a win at all costs kind of game, that it made you think about things differently, because it made you think about balance rather than just optimization. And so then from there, I just pulled a lot of stuff into it. Like there's a lot of things that are just like Easter eggs in the art to interesting little stories and interesting little cultural tidbits built in there. Like I just tried to make it like infused with as much Cherokee-ness as I could, while at the same time still trying to make it like accessible to an audience outside of the culture. And Dave has really helped with that a lot, because there's plenty of times that either I or one of the artists has like proposed something and we get into it and Dave's like, I don't know what that means. You're gonna have to explain that. Don't take it out, but definitely explain it.
And that was the big thing, is anytime they said something, I'm like, because it was an indigenous team with me being the only non-Cherokee on the team. So I made it very clear. It's like, we're not, any ideas you have, we're going to use them. We just need to explain them so that I and other non-Cherokee get it. So
that side is really interesting to me, because you really did build a team around this that is much more enriched in that lore by default, I'm guessing. But it is true, because very often if you look at it, I played a game recently, Tyrannaw, which I found interesting, but a lot of the cards were beautiful, but I had to take the time to read all the cards. The vibe of the game, it was one of those scenarios where it's like, I appreciate the game quite a bit, but at the same time, to really learn anything or take away the kind of message that you're talking about was a little more challenging. You've talked about how do you strike that balance, and you're talking about striking a balance of, okay, there's this lore, there's all this, but this still needs to mechanically be a game that the people want to play and put on the table. So talk about striking that balance, if you could, a little bit, David. What was the most challenging part in your role, when obviously you're trying to be very respectful of something incredibly important, but at the same time, then, come back to say, well, what can we do? And how do we, make this work for someone who maybe isn't going to understand that, and make it, in that I guess, balance the approach that it kind of hits all levels that need to be hit.
Especially early on, a lot of it was, doing a lot of play test, obviously, and then going back to Will and sitting down with feedback I got from players and kind of both things they said and asked, and also kind of what they were trying to do. And as we kind of dialed in the balance on, because this is a semi-co-op, which anyone else out there who's tried to design a semi-co-op, it's not easy. Because you always end up going too co-op or too competitive, etc. And dialing that in was a hard part. And then there was a lot of both of us come from an academic background, and so and something I recommend to all designers: make design docs. This is your goal and your vision for this. And there was a lot of going back and going, okay, this isn't quite working. Let's go back to the design doc. Back to the goal here. How can we change the mechanic to meet the goal? So, one of the things Will came to me when he first came to me was, he talked about wanting to, this is kind of Eurogame, but Eurogames are the 4 X's. This one is what he called the 4 C's, which is, it's cultivation, conservation, continuation, and competition.
Yeah.
And so it was using those 4 C's, every mechanic needed to tie back to one of them. And so they needed to support those and support each other. And so just by doing that and constantly making sure we're tying back to that core goal, that helped a ton in making sure that, this game was doing what we wanted it to do. And then, just sometimes it was just a matter of, streamlining things. It's like you had, we're kind of hitting the goal, but it's clunky. So we go back and just combine things down. So for one case, the village cards that people can buy, at one point we had a specific type of village card that expanded your inventory. And, everyone wanted to buy those, obviously, because you want to expand your inventory, have more resources, have more things you can do. And then one day we were talking about it, and I was like, why don't we just get rid of those cards and just put the inventory baskets on all the other cards, just distribute them out. And that way we get rid of that card, and we just make it so people are more likely to buy the other cards now because the inventory's there plus the other benefit they give. And little things like that just streamline and get rid of some of the clunkiness can make a massive difference in how well a game plays.
It's really interesting to me too, because as I noted, and I did, obviously, this gives people a nice visual look at some of the cards in the game. We can certainly talk for a little bit what's going on with these, but I wanted to say, I watched in the playthrough was what looked like an incredibly smooth turn process.
Mm-hmm.
All the actions are in this game, I would say, are very easy to understand, but when to take what actions is still the challenge, which is, to me, what makes that work well. Because you talk about balance. So one of the things that I'll bring back up that kind of first slide, but just as an example, and talk me through this a little bit. But in all those sections where the resources are, the 6 different resources, if I'm not mistaken, in all those sections, generally speaking, once they fill up, everyone gets the resource, plus based on if your token, your piece is in there, you're going to be getting additional resources. So you're being strategically trying to figure out what everyone's going to want. But what I found really interesting was the fact that you're taking these out of a bag. You, as the player who went, knows what it is and are having to choose where to put it. So very strategically, you've got to help each other in this process to ultimately accomplish completing the game, which is that track in the middle. And I don't know if there's a technical term for what you call that. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but
I call it the storehouse, the track in the middle.
Yeah. But talk about that aspect for me of that kind of, it's a secret to every other player what's on some of these spots as you're playing through each round.
So we've kind of referred to it as a hidden worker placement mechanic, which is, a good enough description of what it is. And this is something that was core to the game from the very beginning of the design, right? Like they started out as cards and eventually they morphed into tokens. But it's this idea that, you can play very competitively by putting your opponent's tokens down where they're not going to do any good for them, or you can play very helpfully by putting them where it will benefit everyone. And there's the rabbits. So the rabbits are a very important thing because Rabbit is not a player. Rabbit is the bad guy in this. Rabbit's the trickster. If Rabbit shows up, all of those resources that are produced are diverted to the rabbit burrow. So nobody gets anything, and instead the rabbit steals everything. And the rabbit burrow is that little section with the ears there inside the blue circle in the middle. And those resources you can steal back later. So the 1 and 2 spots below the rabbit burrow are where you can kind of place your workers to steal all those resources back. So it just kind of gets delayed, but you might be able to get them back later, or they might get lost depending on what happens. But it really gets this really cool mechanic, this really cool dynamic of people thinking about, do I want to be helpful? Do I want to kind of mess with everybody else? How can I be helpful? Because sometimes putting another player's villager in a space helps you because everybody gets one, right? When it produces, everybody gets one. So maybe you just need one medicine or just one corn. So putting somebody else's thing there is still helpful. Another cool aspect of it is that if you'll notice on the player boards, which are those cards to the top, each one has a space. So at the beginning of your beginning of the season, you'll have one of your villagers that is on that space that you know what it is, right? So you always have like this one that you clearly know, I'm going to be putting my guy out there where I want it, and so you have to be a little bit careful because somebody else could throw a rabbit at you, but it gives you a little bit of control, and you can buy certain village cards that also give you a little bit more control. So there's a little bit of randomness to it, but not too much because a lot of it really just comes down to strategically placing things and negotiation. And another aspect that's cool about the production mechanic are those little tree icons that you see on the board. There's 2 tree icons on each of the different resource types to start. If that resource is already produced, you can place another villager there, taking one of those trees off and into your inventory. So that's basically you're cutting down part of the forest, you're producing more resources, but now that tree token is now a stump and it's stuck in your inventory, and you have to pay later to get rid of it. So you're trading production now for benefits later because it makes it harder to produce those resources in a future turn unless you pay to restore that tree to the board. And so that also lets you kind of manipulate the board a little bit because you can restore those trees in other places that kind of alter how easy or difficult it is to produce different types of resources.
There really is, though. I think again, it's very interesting with the 3 phases of every round, or forever. I should say not the 3 phases for every player.
Yeah,
as you're playing through. It's extremely straightforward. So I mean, you do have that choice. You can place 2 tokens. I know you can buy the cards. And one of the other things I thought was a little different, not ever. Some games do this, I know, but essentially, if you go to buy a card, for example, in that bottom row, from my understanding, anyone on their turn could buy multiple of them if they could, and those are useful for them. But again, you're using resources that you also need to accomplish things in every round. So you have to balance that because ultimately you still could lose if you as a group don't get this done. So you can only buy so much in any section, but you are able on your turn to buy up pretty much the entire lot in theory.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's one of the things that once people get good at the game, I start seeing is them using the action economy much more efficiently because you have the bag of all of the little villager tokens. Once that bag is empty, the season ends. After 4 seasons, the game is over. So you only get so many turns. So you have to make sure that these things happen fast. So you doing multiple cards, whether you're completing multiple tasks or buying multiple village cards at once, that is really powerful because it saves you those precious actions. Because time, the resources are fairly. I got a dog coughing behind me.
I was wondering. I hope the dog is okay there. I heard
she's fine. She's
just old.
Just old. Anyway, the resources are fairly abundant. Sometimes it's difficult to get the right combination, but they're really fairly abundant. Time is limited, right? You're trying to do these things quickly before time runs out.
And depending on how people play, sometimes certain resources can be very hard to get. Either because we've cleared all the trees off there, so it takes 4 workers to get them, or because people have been dropping rabbit in that spot to, keep people from getting to them.
Yeah, and the other thing I found really interesting, and then take the screen away for a moment. I mean, you can still see some of these right in the background behind us as well. But the other thing I found very interesting was what you mentioned, where you could take on, this one of those trees, flip it over, and you've got that stump, limited resource. So it gives you a little bit of that control of the situation. But I've got this to get rid of it. Only have 5 resources, because to your point, it seems like, yes, resources are plentiful in the sense, but you've got only so much storage. And unlike a game, for example, that I really enjoy, like Beer and Bread, where you could get extra spots to put them as easily, or they have a thing where it goes away. With these, what happens to those extra resources? Do those go to the center for the rabbit?
Those go to the rabbit. Yeah. So you have to build those village cards to expand your storage, because having limited storage really does limit you. It makes you want to spin things out of the way, so that if resources come in on other players' turns, because remember, other players are placing villagers, you're going to be getting resources when those things flip, and sometimes they'll be placing yours to get extra. So you're going to be getting resources in all the time. You have to keep things spent out to make room. If you overflow, if you have too many resources, they go to the rabbit, right? And then somebody else can steal them back later. So they're not completely gone, but it definitely makes it harder to get them. And then of course, if there's just a pile of things in the rabbit burrow, if people go there to steal them back, to take them back from rabbit, anything they can't fit is returned to the supply. It goes away.
It goes away.
So balancing your storage and time and when to spend things becomes really important.
Yeah, I do want to connect a little bit back to the lore as we've been talking about this. So in what I was looking at there, the rabbit, or this trickster rabbit, is one of those pieces of lore, which is what you've built around. How did you come up about the fact that I wanted to build around this as opposed to some other? I mechanically, it obviously is incredibly sound. I think that might be part of it. But how did you how did you decide on the rabbit as kind of that centerpiece for this game?
So in Cherokee folklore, rabbit plays a very prominent role. So if you read any of these stories, the majority of them are kind of about rabbit. And in these stories, think of them kind of like fables. They have a historical connection to stories like Brer Rabbit, which you might be familiar with, and also like an indirect connection to characters like Bugs Bunny, right? Like those were like sort of appropriations of indigenous and African folk tales to create those characters. So Rabbit is this character who's like too smart for his own good, right? He's very smart, but he's kind of lazy. He's always messing with other people. He's always getting into trouble and using his wits and his quickness to get out of it, right? And so there's all these stories about him, outrunning we've got our own Cherokee story about the instead of the tortoise and the hare, it's the rabbit and the terrapin racing, right? And in that one, Rabbit loses. And there's another one about Rabbit racing the deer and then losing and then tricking the deer and messing with his teeth, and another one where he's like trying to escape from wolves and he's like confusing these wolves. And there's all these really cool stories that set Rabbit up as this like playful antagonist, right? And I loved the playfulness of it, the fact that it teaches very important ideas about the world and about behaving in society, but also in a very playful way that just made it like a good theme for like the type of story that I was going to tell.
No, it works. It works very well. And the other thing that stood out to me, in particular, as I learned more about the game, was the fact that in terms of the direction of turn order, the way the round tracker goes, you also did this in accordance to that lore, because from my understanding, and you can give me the probably in much better words than I could say, but in the dancing around the fire, you went counterclockwise as opposed to clockwise. Or tell me a little bit about that, because in board games, obviously, very much people I know are used to going clockwise, right? Yeah. But that was one of those things that immediately when I heard it, I was like, that's really interesting. And I never thought of just going counterclockwise instead of clockwise as, a big change. But I was thinking in my head, well, that is a change. We're gonna have to think about that.
That is one of the ones where I said we have to give a little bit of only a sentence or two, but we have to explain why we're doing this in the rule book. Otherwise, people aren't going to get it.
There's a lot of little details in there like that. Like you'll notice once you start looking at the game that the number 7 pops up a lot. You know, including Rabbit, there are 7 different characters in this game. You know, the storehouse has to get to 7. 7 is a sacred number in Cherokee tradition, and so I just infused that as much as I could. It didn't work everywhere. Like originally, the game had like 7 resources and 7 rounds, and it just doesn't work. So I had to like compromise some of that, but I tried to infuse it as much as possible. The story of the going counterclockwise was actually something that one of our artists suggested. So the artists that worked on this, they were also Cherokee. I thought it was very important to make sure that we got an art team that knew the styles and motifs and the history and all of the cultural considerations. And so one of the ideas that they had was, hey, why don't we make this go the other way around? Because that's the way we dance around the fire at ceremonies. And I'm like, that's brilliant. I had not thought of that. That is actually really cool. So if you'll notice on the game board, the score tracker goes counterclockwise around the edge there. And the round tracker around the rabbit burrow also goes counterclockwise. And then in the rule book, we specify that play should continue counterclockwise. Now, if you wanted to, you could play clockwise and it would be totally fine. But the rule book says counterclockwise, and we've got a little paragraph in there explaining why that is. And there's a lot of little things in there. Some of them are explained, and some of them are just a little bit hidden. And somebody who's familiar with Cherokee traditions will probably get them. And somebody else, it's it's just a little hidden Easter egg.
Yeah.
No, I like I said, I never thought about what impact that makes, but it's really interesting to hear what your reaction was, David, because it is. I never thought about it. I guess we're just used to going clockwise. It's
right, and there's a lot of conventions that we are just used to, and it's breaking those conventions for a reason, right? You got to have a reason to do it, but breaking those conventions for a reason is part of setting you into a different mindset about the game, right? About the story it's trying to tell and the way it's going about it. Like it. There are so many little assumptions like that are just built up over time that maybe wouldn't have been an assumption if this tradition of board gaming had grown up out of, North America instead of growing up out of Europe.
Mm-hmm. And talk to me a little bit, though. I think it's always incredibly important to show our love and appreciation for the art, for the illustrators, because visually, as I said at the start of this, stunning. When I look at this, it grabs my attention. So talk about what went into that, the people who did this work, and kind of the direction that, maybe you were going, and what changes may have happened along the way. But yeah, I want to talk about this art and illustration.
Sure.
I mean, from the beginning, Will was like, we have to have Cherokee artists, Cherokee graphic designer. Like he mentioned, you wanted people who already knew the culture, understood motif, not just to get, make sure that the designs looked right, but also to know what designs we shouldn't use, what things we shouldn't touch. And we did kind of the same thing with the stories. Is all the stories in the game are things, and I'll let Will talk about that more later, but we made sure, cultural authentic, but we're touching things that are okay to use. We found Kendra Swafford. She's our illustrator first. She's out of Tahlequah, Oklahoma. She's a fine artist, watercolor. So all the illustrations in the game are watercolors, and
hand painted,
and then scanned. And they're gorgeous. Her ability to manipulate light with the water. It's every piece she's given us is just wow, just gorgeous. We're actually doing she's auctioning off a bunch of the art in December, and I'm going to try to buy some of the pieces because I want some of the originals. The physical watercolors. But she did that, and then we were looking around trying to find a graphic designer who was Cherokee. We were kind of struggling with it, and then a friend of ours, who's another game designer, Kat Dreyer, who's out of Portland, she happened to go to an art market in Portland, met this graphic designer, and kind of was, hey, so I think she's Cherokee, I'm not sure, but here's her information, you should reach out to her. And Will did. And we had an interview. We're talking to her and everything. We're like, oh yeah, and Kendra Swafford's our illustrator. She's like, oh, Kendra, I went to school with her.
Yeah.
And so it just worked out perfectly because they work so well together.
they do work super well together, and it was such luck finding both of them, who were so excited to work on this game and did such a good job. And another thing about having somebody in the culture to do this was, like Dave said, they were able to point out details to us and things that somebody else wouldn't have. Like, if you look at all of the village cards and things, we don't ever depict, like, we depict some things around ceremonial grounds and things, but we don't ever depict the ceremonial fire, which is sacred, and that would be sort of improper to show that. And so she did a really good job of, like, if you look at that Stomp Grounds card there with the turtle shells, you can see the light from the fire off to the side glowing in. And then the turtle shell shakers, which are something that's worn to, kind of rattle and cause noise while you're dancing. She focused in on those, and she was able to do these things like this. And she did so much research for this. Like, we have, depictions of clothing in the game, and she went out and talked to experts to make sure that the clothing she was depicting was accurate to the time period, because we said we wanted everything to look pre-colonial, right? And so she made sure that all of the materials were things that were used prior to European contact. And then Johnny went through and found all these historical patterns and designs, and brought them in, and she did all the graphic design stuff digitally, and brought all those in ways that fit and show these bright, vibrant colors. And I love that one of the pieces of feedback that I've gotten from people is that you can clearly tell that this is Native American art, but it is not what you would stereotypically assume is Native American art, which is awesome, because they are both legit fine artists who are doing really cool things that are bringing, these cultural designs and elements into the modern era in a way that is uniquely them and also uniquely Cherokee. And it just came out beautifully. But I cannot stress how much they have contributed to the game and to the look and feel of the game and the tone of it through their work and through the suggestions they provided. And I will mention that there's one other person who has helped us with this game, who is our cultural consultant and translator, because the game is going to be, you're seeing the cards here that they have the English title at the top and then the Cherokee title right beneath them. The game is going to include a separate set of cards that has everything 100% in Cherokee, and it's going to include a Cherokee rule book. So this is the first game listed on Board Game Geek in the Cherokee language. I had to actually
add the language.
Ask them to add that. But having a cultural consultant, even though I'm a part of the culture, right? I grew up there. Like, I don't know everything. I did a ton of research. I don't know everything. And so having somebody to come in and like double check everything and just to make sure that it's all right, because not only did we want to make sure that everything was accurate, we wanted to make sure that everything was appropriate to share with the outside world, because not everything fits into that category. And so I think we've done our due diligence on that, to make sure that everything is accurate and open to be shared and beautifully. I feel so lucky that we found good artists to work on this, because they did an awesome job. And
sometimes just telling the stories correctly, like we made a change to the intro story in the rule book when we were talking about medicine.
Yeah, so that little intro story was interesting because our cultural consultant, I had a line in there where I said something about, Possum knows where to find all of the best plants for medicine, and he's like, well, don't say that, that's like kind of rude to the plants. So I changed it to say, find a plant for every purpose or something like that. But like these little details that from a particular cultural perspective, like even us who are in the culture but speak English as our primary language don't necessarily like think about or notice.
Well, it stood out to me because as I looked at when you my first comment from the art side, I never even thought of just the style being what it was, the fact that it was handmade and amazing. Is it all unique to each card? Are there repeats, or is it
there are a few repeats. So like the winter house you see there in the middle, there's I think 3 of those in the deck, and a couple of other cards there are 2 of. You can't really see in this image the task card, which is the one on the bottom at the blue with the hands, and that has some repeated art. So having hand-drawn art takes a long time, and it is expensive, and she's worth it. So we had to decide where to limit that. But there are a total of 28 plus the board in the box makes 30 full original pieces.
Wow.
That are included. Yeah.
So you're talking 30 unique pieces that
30 unique pieces,
went through that entire process to get there. So that's pretty incredible. When you talk about the consultancy, talk about that experience, because I think, look, even if you are part of a culture, you can't possibly know everything. You're gonna easily miss something. Talk about that relationship. When did that relationship start? Was that pretty early on in the process, or does that happen, at more of a midway point? Where does that come in?
So I would say for us, it came in more of a midway point. I would recommend to anybody else doing this to start that as early as possible, absolutely as early as possible. Definitely before you start committing to things like art, because it can affect that. It was really good. He's done a really good job of communicating things, looking things over, and just making sure that those details are there. And I actually felt pretty validated because I did a lot of research on this. And when JW looked it over, he was just like, okay, actually, most of this is really good. Really close, just had some little details in there. And then, of course, the language stuff, because I'm a learner. I'm not a native speaker. And that was really important as well, to make sure that language stuff is in there. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to do that, because one of the most interesting, some of the most unexpected feedback I've gotten is just the skepticism from a lot of Native people, a lot of Indigenous people about this, because we're so used to seeing games that are done by people outside of our culture that have no real understanding, and they're not accurate, and there's just lots of bad stuff, right? It happens a lot. And so I have gotten a lot of immediate skepticism. And so I've gotten better at sort of addressing that, and like upfront saying, I'm a Cherokee Nation citizen, like right off the bat, right? Like it seems like a funny, weird thing to do sometimes, to just like upfront say that, but it really matters, because there is so much appropriation out there that we have to say these things, and we have to work with people, and we have to make sure we've covered all those bases, and I think in a lot of cases, a culture consultant can add a lot, and a lot of telling you what you're doing wrong. And if you are doing right, it gives you that just another point of contact, and another piece of information that says, hey, this is appropriate, and this is good, and this is what you're supposed to be doing. Anything to add to that?
It's another layer of feedback. I mean, as Will mentioned, you were talking about feedback earlier from playtesters and community, but yeah, the amount of improvements to the game that came from feedback from Kendra and Johnny, our artist and graphic designer, and from GW, like all of them gave us feedback that improved the game.
Yeah, and one thing that stands out to me is it's not lost on me that there are a lot of games about colonizing and all these things out there. So I can understand whenever anyone makes a game that even at the start says, oh, we're going to do this differently. There's probably a lot of, all right, really, are you going to? I mean, because there really isn't as many. I mean, I go back. So interesting enough, one of the games I always bring up that changed my mindsets on something, which was when I played Votes for Women. And now it not changed my mindset on, I loved the theme. I thought it was fantastic, but it changed my mindset in terms of knowledge, because I learned so much from that game afterwards, because I started digging deeper, and like, I didn't realize this had also happened, all because of little things and because of just the package that got put together. It was a very unique game. But again, to that point, how many games are out there that truly break ground? You're talking about, and I don't want to pass over this, because you said something that I think is incredibly cool, which is the fact that it's cool, but also, I guess, not cool at the same time. But you've now got a game on BGG that you had to add Cherokee language to. So it's cool that ground has been broken, but why hadn't this happened before is the question some would also ask, right? Why is this the first one? So that's, incredibly important work. And I want to make sure I acknowledge that because I just think that is a great accomplishment. So I want to wish you congratulations on that because I had no clue. I guess, again, you have no clue when you haven't thought about it. So that's the kind of education something like this does. So, what was that like, by the way? I have to ask, what was that? Is that just a simple email or is it?
Yeah, it was just sending a message to them through, because we already had the game up on VGG. It was just sending a message to them saying, hey, this game is going to be available in the Cherokee language as well as English. Can you please add that? And then a week later, it took a little while. Like they sent me a message back and said, okay, it's done. And that was it, And to be clear, I'm not the first Cherokee designer. This isn't the first Cherokee board game, right? No. Like there are definitely people who have made, especially like some language learning card games and stuff. Mm-hmm. They're just not listed on BGG, right? Yeah. And and there are a couple of other indigenous languages listed on BGG. Like I know there's at least Inuit and I think a couple others, but I don't know. But yeah, this was the first one in Cherokee.
Was there anything prior to design that inspired you in the board gaming world that contributed to the design of this, to your process? Was there anything that really had been a part of that for you in terms of taking the step of designing this and bringing this world?
So there's a few games out there and a few things like so I'll tout Elizabeth Ponce, who is she's like a researcher on indigenous media and futurisms, or she was, and now she works full-time in the video game industry, and she makes indigenous video games that kind of bring her Anishinaabe culture into it. And she's done a couple board games too. And that was one of the first people I'd seen who was bringing their indigeneity into the gaming space. And I thought that was super cool. It was one of my inspirations for kind of coming into this. Since then I've seen some other awesome native designers, Connor Alexander, who did Coyote and Crow and a board game Wolves, and he's really awesome. He's a good friend of mine now. We've kind of connected through game design, and we're friends now. And I have to say, Wolves is a game that came at some of the same themes and ideas as Winter Rabbit, and created completely different gameplay. Like the gameplay is not similar at all, but like it's based on this. It's semi-cooperative and it's based on the same sort of principles. Like we were trying to tell a very similar story and came in a very different direction. There's a few other indigenous games out there that I've played and I really, really like. And Burn the Fort's another one that I've got on my shelf and I've been waiting to play that. We got to get together and play that, Dave.
Yes, we do.
But there's definitely some inspiration out there. I don't know. Can you think of anything else that got us going, Dave, when we started this?
I mean, so that's on the good side of inspiration. I think the other side of it is not naming any names of games, but there's a lot. I won't say a lot, but there are several Western / native themed games that have come out of Europe over the last 10 years or so, where you can tell that they did no research and definitely did not have a cultural consultant. They mixed different cultures and that sort of thing, and kind of seeing those and laughing at those, and just how bad some of them are. Not necessarily the gameplay's fine, but some of them just the depictions are so inaccurate that I know that was one of the things that kind of sparked early discussions where we'd laugh about some of these, and Will would talk about how I wish there was a better depiction here, and then eventually he came up, Winter Rabbit began.
Now, you've talked a little bit about this, but I did want to bring it out. No, I moved it. Hold on a sec here. Oh, here it is. So I did want to also just share with people a quick look. So, hopefully people can go and make sure that they're ready to check this out on Kickstarter. But I do have that screen here. Bear 1 second. So there's your Kickstarter launching soon page. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like we said, the striking art right up front. I want to talk to you a little bit before we wrap up about the fact that you're going to Kickstarter. Obviously, that's a process you both talked about. This isn't necessarily the only thing you do. So how do you go into a time management perspective that is Kickstarter, because Kickstarter is time consuming. I've talked to enough people to know a lot more than I almost wish I knew. So how do you go and prepare for that? I know obviously it's a big deal.
It is. The one plus side for both of us is we both have some background in project management. We both do a lot of research and a lot of planning. So we got a lot of checklists. It's our third board game, but it's our fifth or
it's 4 or 5, it'll be seventh
campaign, I think.
Yeah.
So we've got a little experience on this, but yeah, a lot of planning, a lot of double checking each other to make sure we've got stuff knocked out, and really give yourself more time than you think you need for every step, because problems will arise.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a lot, and since we're launching here in a couple weeks, we are really in crunch time right now too, right? So it's a lot of coordinating those last things of getting the videos finished, getting the things to the right reviewers at the right time, making sure we're on time for our podcast interviews, making sure that all those little graphics are in there, then all of the details are correct, because there's so many little details.
And then even beyond the prep for launching the Kickstarter itself, all the post stuff. So like I'm emails back and forth to our manufacturer for quotes probably every 2 to 3 days. We're talking to a number of different fulfillment partners to set up the logistics for all of the delivery afterwards, and all those timelines as well. So yeah, it's just a self-publishing. There's a point where you stop designing completely and you start focusing on nothing but the publishing side of it, and it's a lot of logistics.
I also have to say that both of our partners are very patient with us.
Yeah, the patient spouse is a blessing. I say that as I've got a wife with my 2 kids, who once a week knows I'm going to be off doing a video somewhere. So I can appreciate that. And they're the people who really make it work in the long run. I always feel like I'm incredibly excited to kind of see this out there and to see people have a chance to do it. I feel like there's to your talking about earlier about just your background with the educational video gaming and all that. I feel like anytime something like this comes out, it's an opportunity for growth and learning, for education. And again, semi-cooperative games, I think you're right. I think they have to be handled a little bit of a different way, because you have to be mindful of the challenge that comes with semi-cooperative. But based on what I've seen, and again, for anyone watching this, I'm going to, if you don't see it, it will be in there. I'm going to have an update with a link that goes to the playthrough that I'd watched of you doing this, just because I think it gives a great overview of what is a very straightforward game, but the decisions, straightforward, I should say, in actions, but the decisions, definitely some tough decisions. And I appreciate the time with you tonight. I can't let you go yet. I have a question or two that I got to ask.
Okay.
So what I got to ask you, and as I ask everyone on this, is those lessons learned. I know you've done a variety of projects, but the lessons learned in particular with this project, what advice would you give to those people who maybe want to tell a story that hasn't been told, or maybe hasn't been told nearly as well? What advice do you give to them to go about that process in the board gaming world, in what you've learned from the creation of this game? And I know obviously there's a journey ahead. You still got the Kickstarter, you still got to produce, and you still got to deliver. But what have you taken away thus far that you would tell those who maybe want to do it themselves?
So I first of all, I would say, kind of like what Dave mentioned, write down the intent you want with the game, the story you want to tell, what those core concepts and values of the game are, and always refer back to that. Because as you design and as things change, you'll start to drift, but you can bring back, right? And ultimately you're trying to like pare the game down to just what tells that story without any extra stuff to it. And for me, a lot of the difficulty of this was I tried a million things, but ultimately, like, when it started getting good is when I started like honing in and making things a little bit more elegant. So I think just writing down your intent, the story you want to tell, and stick to that and pull back to it. And it will take a while, right? When you're doing things that you haven't really seen before, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of experimentation. But you'll get there. Just keep circling around it until you go down the drain. So to speak.
Kind of building off that is, if you are trying to tell a game or make a game, tell a story that's, about your unique culture or live experience, etc. Along with that intent document, that design document, just you got to work to be true to yourself and what you were trying to say, because you're going to get feedback from people that want to change your game to something else. Take it a direction that they think would be a good game, and they might be right, but that's not your game. You got to stay true to what it is you want to make, and keep going back to that design document, keep going back to the intent, and and you may end up having to change that document a little bit if you realize that what you originally thought you wanted wasn't exactly what you wanted. But you got to keep going back to that and stay true to your vision.
I love that message, and it in no way related to anything real world, but I will just say it reminds me of something that we heard in an interview with Jenna Felly, who designed Cosmic Frog. And Jenna describes it as, I make a game that I want to play. I made my game, right? And
yes.
I just love that, because in the end, you want to like your game that you designed, don't you? I mean,
I play tested 100 times. You better like it.
I would never finish anything if I wasn't working on things that I really wanted to, right? Like, I've got to be passionate about it in some capacity to keep it up, to do the work, to do this on top of having a full-time job. Like, yeah, you got to like it.
No, look, I want to say thank you to both of you for joining me tonight. Again, just for everyone watching live, not live, doesn't matter. I want to just remind everybody, the Kickstarter, I know, launching soon, right? So
August 20th.
Yep. August 20th, you heard it right there. So August 20th, this is going to be live. And if you have questions about it, feel free to, for those on the Discord, feel free to drop it in. I'm happy to, if there's anything that was answered in this, I'll make sure you're aware of a time clip for it. This will get time coded shortly thereafter. But ultimately, I want to thank you both for spending the time with me tonight. Definitely wishing you the best of luck with this campaign. I know a lot of hard work went into it. And I can't wait to see what the end result is. And it looks like, again, even from the preview page, you can tell people are excited. So I cannot wait to see this on tables in the near future at cons and all that. So thank you both for being with me tonight.
Thank you too. It's been a great conversation. I'm glad we could be here.
Well, thank you guys. To everyone on the Tabletop Express, a quick update just to drop it. It's going to be on next Wednesday, so that should be the 14th. We're going to be Gen Con review for our Call Aboard. So that's going to be the topic for Call Aboard, followed by a playthrough the next week of Decorum, the Moving Out expansion, I should say. We've played Decorum, and then ending our month with our What's on Your Table edition of Call Aboard, where we want to hear what games you played in that past month, and then plenty of good stuff to come in September. So stay tuned, everybody, for all of that. I want to thank my guests, David and Will, for being with me here tonight, and I will see you all for Call Aboard on the 14th. Till then, have a great night, everybody, and thanks for coming aboard the Tabletop Express. Have a good night.
Good night.